The second impeachment to former President Trump is over. How to view this unprecedented event?
We did something that's never happened in American history.
How did we come to this point with the big tech and the social media companies?
When all this started 30 years ago, this is what Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and Sergey Brin and Larry Ellison, all of those people, they basically developed a very good strategy.
What's happening at Stanford University towards professors right now?
So I'm speaking today that in 4 hours, the Stanford faculty is going to attack me. That they attack anybody. Yesterday's revolutionary is tomorrow's counter-revolutionary. So you're always raising the bar of what's acceptable to be a revolutionary.
Is the United States inevitably heading towards hard left or even communism? How to understand Biden administration's China strategy? What is the hope for the United States?
They were the people who were saying, hey, you Americans are really naive. I've lived there, or my family's from there, and you have no idea what these people do. It has nothing to do with race. It's an ideology that infected Europe, infected Russia, infected Cuba, and unfortunately infected China. And if you go down that road, I can tell you where it's going to end up.
Welcome to Sound of Hope News. I'm your host, Cathy Zhang. In this episode, we will have Professor Victor Davis Hanson, the Classist and the Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, to discuss these questions. Professor Hanson, welcome to our show, and thank you for taking my interview.
Thank you.
First of all, could you briefly summarize your take on the second impeachment trial of former President Trump?
Well, you could say many things about it. The first is that although constitutional scholars are split depending on their political affiliations, it does say in the Constitution that an impeachment trial will be directed against a high government official or the president. And in the case of the president, the Chief Justice will preside. So we did something that's never happened in American history. We had a second impeachment trial in the Senate. Never done that before to any one president. And we've never had a trial in the Senate when the president was a private citizen. And that's contrary to the Constitution, I think. And then we've never had, thirdly, one in which the Chief Justice was not presiding. We're playing videos, but we don't have any information, even now, 5 weeks after the attack, about the necessary legal proof of what actually happened. So by that, everybody says 5 people were killed, and they were, and it was tragic, but 4 of them were Trump supporters. One of them apparently was trampled. 2 of them had medical issues, probably dropped dead from stress, tragically. The third was unarmed and shot. In most high-profile shootings of an unarmed person, we immediately get demands for the name of the policeman. We have not had that. So we don't know who shot the Trump supporter who illegally entered the Capitol. Second, the police officer, we were told by CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times, Washington Post, I could go on, but was struck on the head with a fire extinguisher and died from a concussionary injury. But apparently that's not true. The medical report, we don't have an autopsy report. I think the deceased was cremated very quickly, but we don't have any evidence that he had a physical, traceable, ostensible injury. In other words, he may have, and he texted his brother after. We have a text from him. And so I'm not trying to contextualize the violence, but there is some question that nobody on the Trump side used lethal violence against anybody, that nobody died from the Trump people, but people on the other side did use lethal violence. So that's an issue. Another issue is there seems to be evidence on social media that this was pre-planned and that the FBI and law enforcement knew about it. And there are videos where people kind of stand aside. Some fought heroically against the mob, some didn't, and allowed. So there's another question. Why were these people allowed to get anywhere near the Capitol? Why did people not take it seriously? And so before you can impeach a president for sedition and insurrection, you need to get the facts of the alleged insurrection and sedition. We don't have the complete story. There's certainly not enough facts known about it to say that Donald Trump organized a bunch of rioters who stormed the police and the Capitol and killed a policeman. We know that that doesn't seem to be true in the narrative that we know, at least in its entirety.
A lot of people have this question: is United States going towards this type of leftist communism soon or inevitably?
Well, I think the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, voiced your concerns the other day when he said, we're very worried about what's coming out of America, this radical, woke, intolerant culture. It's hard to know because ostensibly the Democrats control the presidency in both houses of Congress, but their hold on them is tenuous and they're becoming very extreme. They have public support for about half of the executive orders, but not for the key ones. I don't think most people want to stop pipelines or open the borders at a time of a COVID pandemic. So we don't know whether the unpopularity of a lot of the initiatives they're trying to force through will force some Democratic House members or a senator or two. You only need one senator to stop it. The other thing is the cultural and social revolution. All of these fits of hysteria throughout history, the Salem witch trials, the Bolshevik Revolution, the McCarthy period in American history, as you know from your own country's, your mother country's history, the Mao Revolution, they reach a critical mass. They either become so unhinged and they're so unsustainable and that they attack anybody. Yesterday's revolutionary is tomorrow's counter-revolutionary. So you're always raising the bar of what's acceptable to be a revolutionary. So in the New York Times, for example, they're going after their own reporters now and trying to destroy them for things they said 2 years ago. And where I am at Stanford University, they're going after professors at the Hoover Institution, and we don't know what they're after. Did you ever condemn Donald Trump? That kind of stuff. Did you or did you ever? And they're bringing it up today at the faculty meeting. So one of two things happens when it becomes unsustainable. The Jacobins in France. Either you have a takeover of totalitarians that stifle all dissent and people get scared. And that's what happened in Russia and that's what happened in China. Or you have a pushback, a counter-revolutionary movement. And that's what happened in France when the Jacobins they created the guillotine to guillotine everybody, then they got guillotined. Or the Salem witch trials, they stopped it. Or the McCarthy period when Robert Welch, the Army attorney, said to Joe McCarthy, have you no decency? When McCarthy used to do this, he would say, I have a list here of 150 known communists, maybe some more, but he had no evidence of that. And people were terrified of it. And then it passed. And we had a little bit of that in the Me Too. It started out legitimately enough. And then finally, they were going back 30 years into male and female, their lives, and find out they'd ever done something when they were like Justice Kavanaugh, when he was supposedly 17 years old. And those are unsustainable. And then they fizzle. I don't know where we are now. I just know that if we have another 3 or 4 months like this, we're going to destroy our institutions. We're renaming, the Wilson School at Princeton. We're renaming Father Sarah Boulevard at Stanford. We're destroying the Cervantes statue in Golden Gate Park. We're renaming the Lincoln School, the Washington School, the Jefferson School in San Francisco. These can't go on like they are. We're getting rid of the national anthem in NBA in some franchises. So there's either going to be a pushback or they're going to consolidate power. So it's very important that people speak out while you still have a chance to stop it. It's endemic to human nature that this happens. And from the communist Chinese history, they started out by saying that intellectuals were counter-revolutionaries and they should go out in the countryside and work. And then it was they questioned their children to see if they had heard anything their parents said. And finally, they were going after people that wore eyeglasses and were contaminated with the Western eyes. So there's a evolutionary process that's quite scary.
You just mentioned that at Stanford University, they are going after the professors at Hoover Institution. Could you elaborate a little bit more?
Those of us who are older or more established, we have greater leeway. And I think for people like myself and others that are writers and thinkers I'm in 67 years old, it's incumbent upon me to speak out. So I'm speaking today that in 4 hours, the Stanford faculty is going to attack me and say that I was not forceful in legitimizing the Biden victory quick enough. They're not even going to accuse I ever said that Donald Trump was robbed of the election, but that I didn't acknowledge quick enough that there was no fraud. I think there was fraud, but I'd always said I don't think it can be proven at a magnitude that would overturn the election. That's not good enough for them. And so you have to speak out. In my case, one of the faculty accusers is a professor who started something called the Anti-Fascist Campus Network, which, that's kind of an eerie resonance, anti-fascist, because that's the name of Antifa. And on one of his websites, he's had anti-Semitic literature, a reference to reading an anti-Semitic, really a trashy piece of work. And 5 years ago, he had students go out. I say he had students that he bragged about shut down the San Mateo Bridge. And there was car crashes, not major ones, but so those are the type of people who are bringing charges, and we can't respond to them and say, how dare you do that? We just have to defend ourselves. Well, we have to defend ourselves, and it's happening all over the United States. It's happening in the Senate. It's happening in your field of the media. And so when I say what do I mean by it? It means that the left says, we're going to go after you for something you wrote 10 years ago, or you said something 6 months ago on a Fox broadcast that we have every word that you've ever said, and that was incorrect. And sometimes people are doxxed. We're going to release your personal information, or we're going to write you emails, or we're going to swarm an article you write with trolls that will comment. We're going to make life miserable for you. However, there's always an outlet for that implied. If you were to change your incorrect posture and sort of join the majority, then all of a sudden you would have a sort of career insurance. And that's a very enticing thing. If you look at actors, for example, how does Alec Baldwin, the leftist actor, get away with calling people homophobic slurs, racial slurs? And he does it all the time, but he's woke. And so so is Madonna. So is Snoop Dogg. So is Maxine Waters. And so is Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden has a history of doing things that if he was not woke and didn't have cancel insurance, he would have been in big trouble, because Tara Reade's accusations against the current president were far more serious than what was against Kavanaugh. And there's pictures of him sort of being overly intimate in violating the private space of young women. But because he's a leftist, and the media and Wall Street and Silicon Valley and social media and Hollywood, they leave him alone. And that's very important to understand, because that gives an enticement or an incentive for people to make those decisions. So if you're a NBA player and you want endorsements, let's say in China, and your market is falling in the United States, and it is, are you going to be more or less prone to be woke? Are you going to criticize the United States, take a knee, raise your fist, and less critical of what China is doing with the Uyghurs, or in Hong Kong, or in Tibet, or to its own people? I think the answer is clear, that you're going to be more critical of the United States and more favorable to the communist Chinese government, because it's more lucrative. There's no downside. Nobody's going to cancel you. You proved how left-wing you were. And that's where we are. Everybody comes out of the woodwork. The historian Thucydides discussed this in the third book of his history about Corcyra, when societies get into fits of madness. And some of the themes are that it escalates until it becomes unsustainable, as we talked about. But also, people come out of the woodwork not for ideological reasons. Those are cloaks or excuses or veneers. They come out of the woodwork to get somebody else's job, or to pay back a girlfriend that dropped them, or a cousin who did better than they did in their family, or someone that once made fun of them in an article. So they're personal agendas that are used to destroy people under the guise that they're politically and ideologically incorrect. And that's where we are too right now.
So how do you think Biden administration's strategy towards the communist China so far?
I find really scary, and I looked at some of the things that he talked about with the Chinese leadership on the phone the other day, and he talked about, I think, high-speed rail that China had told him how. And we know in California it's a disaster, but the implicit suggestion was that Joe Biden, under the influence of John Kerry, believes that they can partner with China, which is the world's largest polluter of fossil fuels, and is opening, I think, 40 coal plants a year. But China thinks that by mouthing things to Biden, like, and I mean mouthing because I don't think they're sincere, high-speed rail, solar panels, climate change, Paris Accord, that therefore we'll partner with them and we feel that they're woke or they're correct. And then in exchange for that pretense, the Chinese just shrug and say, well, how stupid are these stupid Americans? We get to have the Uyghurs in camps. We've already destroyed Hong Kong democracy. They're not even bringing up Tibet anymore. We're dumping our product. We're manipulating the currency. We're back to technological appropriation, patent, copyright theft. And then they're so stupid that when we don't tell them, about the origins of the Wuhan virus, the COVID-19 virus, we don't give them accurate information about transmissibility. We make fun of them about the travel ban. We corrupt who. When they kind of push back under Trump, we call them xenophobes and racists. They're racist. And these stupid Americans are so sensitive, they would rather be child molesters than racists. So the Chinese, what I'm getting at is, they have the American mind down brilliantly, much more so than the Americans, especially on the left, understand the communist Chinese mind. And so they understand the American left mind, and they know how to manipulate it. And they're going to find a lot of advantages in the next 4 years. The problem is they have so much money, and they're so insidiously intertwined with American technology and social media, and also universities and corporations and Wall Street, that there's so many people working for them. And you can see some of the names that Biden has appointed have ties, including his own son. So the advantage with Trump was that he was such a pariah and an outsider. And before he became president, Wall Street despised him. The big banks despised him. That I'm not saying it's because he was morally superior. He just didn't have a lot of contacts with the Chinese. He wasn't compromised. And so when he went after them, it was a shock to them, because they kept saying to themselves, how do we get to this guy? Do his kids have investments? Did he sell his Trump name to a company that made a hotel in China? There was some, but not very many. And that's why he was so tough on China.